Daniel walked out on his wife Emma and their 7-year-old daughter Lily, who was dying of leukemia, completely unaware his wife had just closed a $72 billion construction deal that morning, the largest private infrastructure contract in American history. He left them both to marry his mistress, Vanessa, a woman he believed was a successful investment executive who could give him the lavish lifestyle his struggling budget analyst wife never could. But what Daniel didn't know was that Emma wasn't just any ordinary mother fighting to save her child. She was the hidden billionaire CEO of Sterling Global Construction, the woman who'd been secretly running a $40 billion empire while he thought she was barely making ends meet. And she deliberately concealed her fortune to test the one man she thought she could trust with her heart. When he signed those divorce papers with his mistress waiting in the car outside their daughter's hospital room, he had no idea he was walking away from the largest fortune in the Western Hemisphere, or that his mistress had been working for his wife the entire time, documenting every moment of his betrayal. What Emma did next didn't just crush him. It systematically erased him from the world he desperately wanted to enter, and exposed a betrayal so devastating that his name became a warning across the nation. But how does a man who threw away billions and the only woman who truly loved him ever recover? And what happens when he discovers the sickening truth about who was really pulling the strings all along? Daniel Chen stood in the doorway of their daughter's hospital room, watching Emma hold 7-year-old Lily's frail hand, and felt nothing but contempt. The fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows across Emma's exhausted face, highlighting the dark circles under her eyes from countless sleepless nights. She hadn't bothered with makeup in weeks, hadn't bought herself anything new in months, and her clothes hung loose on her frame from skipped meals and constant stress. This was the woman he'd married 8 years ago, the woman who'd promised him a life of comfort and success, and look where they were now, drowning in medical debt with no end in sight. "I can't do this anymore," Daniel said quietly, his voice cutting through the steady beep of monitors. Emma's head snapped up, her red-rimmed eyes meeting his. For a moment, he saw something flicker across her face. Not surprise, but something else. Something he couldn't quite read. It looked almost like disappointment mixed with grim satisfaction, as if she'd been waiting for this moment, expecting it even. But that made no sense. Why would she expect him to leave? He pushed the thought aside. "Lily needs you," Emma whispered, her grip tightening on their daughter's small hand. The little girl was asleep, her chest rising and falling in shallow breaths. Her bald head a stark reminder of the aggressive chemotherapy that was draining their bank account faster than Emma's meager salary could replenish it. Daniel remembered when Lily's hair had been long and black like Emma's, before the leukemia diagnosis had turned their world upside down 6 months ago. He remembered Emma's face when the doctor had delivered the news, the way she'd gone completely still, not crying, not screaming, just calculating. He'd thought she was in shock, but now looking back, her reaction had been strange. She'd immediately pulled out her phone, made 3 calls, and when she'd returned to the consultation room, she'd told him everything would be fine. He'd been furious at her apparent denial of reality. "I need me," Daniel shot back, pulling out the manila envelope from his jacket. "I've met someone else, Emma. Someone who actually has ambition, who wants more out of life than this." He gestured around the sterile hospital room, at the medical equipment keeping their daughter alive, at Emma's rumpled clothes and tired face. "Vanessa runs an investment firm. She understands success, understands what it takes to build something real. She doesn't waste her life pretending to be some kind of, what do you even do again? Budget analyst for some construction company nobody's ever heard of?" The words were designed to wound, and Daniel felt a savage satisfaction when Emma flinched. What he didn't see was the way her jaw tightened, or how her free hand curled into a fist against her thigh. What he couldn't know was that Emma had spent the last 8 years deliberately cultivating this exact image. The struggling middle-class wife, the budget analyst with the forgettable job, the woman who clipped coupons and wore discount store clothes. It had all been a test, one that Daniel was failing spectacularly. Emma had inherited Sterling Global Construction from her father when she was 23, fresh out of MIT with degrees in civil engineering and business. The company had been worth $3 billion then. Under her leadership, working 18-hour days while maintaining her cover As a low-level analyst at her own company, she transformed it into a $40 billion empire. Every work trip Daniel thought was some boring conference was actually Emma negotiating with senators, meeting with foreign dignitaries, and revolutionizing urban infrastructure across 3 continents. Every night she came home, exhausted from data entry, was actually recovery from grueling negotiations that would reshape skylines. She'd kept a small apartment near the office, told Daniel it was for late nights, and he'd believed her because he'd wanted to believe his wife was exactly as mediocre as she pretended to be. The ultimate test had been Lily's diagnosis. Emma had the resources to pay for every treatment, every specialist, every experimental therapy in the world. But she'd wanted to see what Daniel would do when their comfortable middle-class life was threatened, when he had to actually sacrifice something, when he had to choose between material comfort and family. She'd set aside $10 million in a trust for Lily's care, money that would deploy automatically if Daniel stayed, if he proved himself worthy of knowing the truth. Instead, she'd watched him grow more resentful with each medical bill, more distant with each treatment cycle, more enamored with Vanessa Chen, Emma's own goddaughter and the deputy director of Sterling Global's investment division. "Sign these," Daniel said, dropping the divorce papers on the rolling table beside Lily's bed. "I'm giving you the house. It's worth something at least. It should help with the bills. Vanessa and I are flying to Monaco tomorrow. She's closing some huge deal, and she wants me there to celebrate." His chest puffed with borrowed pride, basking in the reflected glory of what he thought was Vanessa's success. Emma looked down at the papers, then back at her daughter's sleeping face. Lily stirred slightly, her small features peaceful despite the poison coursing through her veins, fighting to save her life. Emma had spent 6 months watching Daniel's true nature emerge like a photograph in developing fluid, each day revealing more of who he really was when the facade of comfort was stripped away. She thought of her own father's warning before he died. "Money reveals character, Emma, but so does the lack of it. Test the people you love with both, and you'll know their truth." "I'll sign them," Emma said softly, and Daniel's shoulders sagged with relief. "But I want you to know something first. Do you remember what you said to me on our wedding day? You stood at that altar and promised that nothing, not poverty, not sickness, not any worldly challenge, would ever make you leave my side. You said I was worth more than any fortune on earth." Her voice cracked slightly, genuine emotion bleeding through her careful control. "I built my entire life around believing those words, Daniel. Everything I did, every choice I made, was because I thought you meant them." Daniel shifted uncomfortably, eager to leave, to get back to Vanessa's penthouse apartment with its panoramic city views, so different from this suffocating hospital room. "People change, Emma. We were kids then. We didn't know what real life was like." "No," Emma agreed, picking up the pen. "We didn't." She signed each page with swift, practiced strokes, the same signature that appeared on billion-dollar contracts, on government agreements, on the documentation that had just finalized the $72 billion deal to rebuild America's crumbling infrastructure. The same signature Daniel had seen 1,000 times on permission slips and grocery lists and never recognized for what it represented. "It's done. You're free." Daniel grabbed the papers, checked the signatures, and nodded. "I'll have my lawyer file these Monday. And Emma, I really do hope things work out for you and Lily. I'm not a monster. I deserve better than this." He waved his hand around the room one final time, and Emma watched something she'd once mistaken for love walk out of her life forever, heading straight into the trap she'd spent 6 months constructing with Vanessa's eager help. The moment the door closed, Emma pulled out her phone and sent a single text. He signed, "Initiate Phase 2. Then she turned back to Lily, who opened her eyes and smiled weakly at her mother. "Is Daddy really gone?" the little girl asked, and Emma heard the hope in her voice rather than sadness. Lily had watched Daniel's resentment grow too, had felt his withdrawal, had asked Emma weeks ago why Daddy was always angry now. "Yes, baby," Emma said, smoothing her daughter's forehead. "But we're going to be okay. Better than okay." She thought about the call she'd received that morning from the head of oncology at Johns Hopkins, confirming they had a spot for Lily in their experimental trial, the one with a 97% remission rate, The one that cost $2 million. The one Daniel knew nothing about because he'd stopped asking about treatment options weeks ago. She thought about the apartment she'd already purchased 3 blocks from the hospital, the one with enough room for a full nursing staff and Lily's favorite toys, and a view of the park where she could watch children play while she recovered. She thought about the specialized tutors already hired, the child psychologist already consulted, the full life her daughter would have without the toxic presence of a father who saw her illness as an inconvenience. Most of all, she thought about what Daniel was going to feel in approximately 72 hours when Vanessa's careful work reached its conclusion. Emma hadn't built an empire by leaving things to chance or by trusting blindly. Every piece was in place, every domino ready to fall. And Daniel, poor stupid Daniel, thought he was walking into a fairy tale ending when he was actually stepping into a masterclass in consequences. Emma almost felt sorry for him, but then she looked at her daughter's face and remembered every disparaging comment, every resentful glance, every moment he'd chosen his own comfort over their child's life, and the sympathy evaporated like morning dew under a merciless sun. Daniel stood in Vanessa's penthouse living room, champagne in hand, staring out at the glittering city below, and feeling like he'd finally found his rightful place in the world. The divorce papers were filed, his lawyer had confirmed everything was in order, and Vanessa was in the bedroom changing for their celebration dinner at the most exclusive restaurant in the city. The one with the year-long waiting list that Vanessa had somehow circumvented with a single phone call. This was the life he deserved, the life Emma's lack of ambition had denied him. "You look happy," Vanessa said, emerging in a stunning black dress that probably cost more than Emma made in a month. She was everything Emma wasn't: polished, sophisticated, connected to the world of real power and real money. At 32, she was a rising star in the investment world, or so she'd told him. They'd met at a charity gala 6 months ago, right after Lily's diagnosis, and Vanessa had pursued him with flattering intensity. She'd understood his frustration, validated his feelings, made him feel seen in a way Emma never had. She'd painted pictures of their future together: international travel, exclusive clubs, the kind of networking opportunities that could transform his stagnant marketing career into something impressive. "I'm free," Daniel said, pulling her close. "Finally free to build the life I always wanted." He kissed her, tasting expensive lipstick and champagne, so different from Emma's tired kisses that had tasted like hospital coffee in desperation. "Tell me about Monaco. Tell me about this deal you're closing." Vanessa's smile was dazzling. "It's complicated, but essentially, we're finalizing the investment structure for the largest infrastructure project in American history. $72 billion to rebuild highways, bridges, public transportation systems across 15 states. My firm has been positioning for this for years, and I'm the lead on the investment portfolio." She said it casually, as if managing $72 billion was just another day at the office, and Daniel felt a surge of pride in his choice. This was a woman who operated on a level Emma couldn't even imagine. What Daniel didn't know was that Vanessa wasn't lying about the deal. She was just lying about her role in it. She was indeed going to Monaco, but not as the lead investor. She was going as Emma's representative, as she always had been, to finalize the paperwork that would officially transfer $72 billion in federal and private funding to Sterling Global Construction. The same company Emma owned, the same company Daniel had mocked as some construction company nobody's ever heard of, while standing in his daughter's hospital room. Vanessa had been Emma's goddaughter since birth, had watched Emma build Sterling Global from a comfortable regional firm into a multinational powerhouse, had seen her godmother make sacrifices that would break most people. When Emma had confided her fears about Daniel 5 years ago, when she'd first noticed the cracks in his character, Vanessa had volunteered for this assignment. "Let me test him," she'd said. "Let me see what he's really made of when temptation presents itself." It had been a long game, waiting for the right crisis, positioning herself perfectly, and when Lily got sick, both women had known the test was beginning. "I want to come to Monaco," Daniel said suddenly. "I want to be there when you sign. I want to see you in your element." Vanessa hesitated, and for just a moment, Daniel saw something flicker across her face. Calculation, perhaps, or concern. but it vanished quickly behind her practiced smile. Actually, that's not possible. The meetings are confidential and security is extremely tight, but I'll be back in 3 days and we can celebrate then. In fact, my firm is hosting a gala next week, a huge event with everyone who matters in the industry. I'll introduce you to people who can transform your career, Daniel. Real players, real money. You'll see what's possible when you're with someone who actually values ambition. The promise was intoxicating, and Daniel let himself be distracted by visions of future success. He spent the weekend in Vanessa's penthouse, surrounded by luxury he'd never experienced with Emma, and tried not to think about Lily in her hospital bed or Emma sitting beside her. He told himself they'd be fine, that Emma had always been resourceful in her small, limited way, that the house he'd generously left her would cover expenses. He convinced himself that he'd done the right thing, that staying would have been martyrdom, that his own happiness mattered too. On Monday morning, Daniel received an email from his company's HR department requesting an immediate meeting. His stomach dropped. Had someone found out about his affair? Had Emma somehow poisoned his professional reputation? But when he arrived at the office, the HR director's face was sympathetic, almost pitying, and that was somehow worse than anger would have been. "Daniel, I'm sorry to do this, but we're letting you go," the director said, sliding a severance package across the desk. "It's effective immediately. We need your badge and laptop." Daniel's mind reeled. "What? Why? My performance reviews have all been excellent. I just landed the Morrison account last month." The director shifted uncomfortably. "It's not about performance. We've been informed by our largest client that having you on staff represents a conflict of interest they're not willing to tolerate. They've made it clear that they'll take their business elsewhere if we don't comply, and frankly, we can't afford to lose them." "I really am sorry." "Who?" Daniel demanded. "Which client?" "Sterling Global Construction," the director said quietly. "They account for 40% of our annual revenue. We have no choice." The name meant nothing to Daniel, or rather, it meant only what Emma had told him. Some construction company she did budget analysis for. Nothing important. "That's insane. I don't even know anyone at that company. My wife worked there, but we're divorced. How is that a conflict?" The director's expression suggested she knew more than she was saying, but she simply shook her head. "I can't discuss their reasoning. I can only tell you that the decision is final. Security will escort you out." Walking out of his office building with his belongings in a cardboard box, Daniel felt the first whispers of unease. This had to be Emma's doing somehow. Some petty revenge for his leaving? But how would she have the influence to get him fired? She was nobody, just a low-level analyst with no real power. He tried calling Vanessa, but her phone went straight to voicemail. Of course, she was probably on the plane to Monaco by now. The unease grew when he arrived back at Vanessa's building, and the doorman stopped him at the entrance. "I'm sorry, sir, but Ms. Chen has left instructions that you're no longer authorized to access her residence." Daniel stared at him. "There must be a mistake. I'm her fiancé. Check again." The doorman, looking genuinely apologetic, showed him the electronic notice on his tablet. "The instruction came through this morning, sir. Ms. Chen has departed for Europe and specified that you should collect your belongings from the storage area. Everything has been packed for you." 20 minutes later, Daniel stood on the sidewalk surrounded by his hastily packed suitcases, his phone clutched in his hand, calling Vanessa over and over. Each call went to voicemail. He tried texting. "What's going on? Why am I locked out? Did I do something wrong?" No response. He called the restaurant where they'd been supposed to have dinner, thinking maybe there'd been some miscommunication. But the hostess informed him that no reservation existed under either of their names and never had. Panic beginning to set in, Daniel checked his bank account and found it nearly empty. Just the small amount he'd kept for personal expenses. Everything else had been in joint accounts with Emma, accounts she'd presumably already frozen. His credit cards, he discovered with mounting horror, were all maxed out from the last 6 months of medical expenses he'd insisted on charging rather than liquidating assets. He'd assumed the divorce settlement would leave him comfortable, but looking at the papers again, he realized he'd signed everything over to Emma to help with Lily's care. The house, the savings account, even his stake in the mutual funds they'd built up over the years. At the time, it had seemed magnanimous, proof of his decency. Now it seemed catastrophically stupid. He had nowhere to go. His parents lived 3 states away, and he'd burned bridges with most of his friends during his pursuit of Vanessa, canceling plans and ignoring calls in favor of time with his mistress. The few friends he tried calling now didn't answer, and he realized with sick certainty that somehow, word had already spread about what he'd done. In the age of social media, secrets didn't keep, and abandoning your sick child for a mistress was the kind of story that spread like wildfire. By evening, desperate and confused, Daniel checked into a budget motel and finally got a text back from Vanessa. "I'm sorry, Daniel, but this isn't going to work out. You should go back to your wife." That was all. No explanation, no elaboration, just a dismissal as cold and casual as throwing out a piece of junk mail. Daniel spent that night trying to piece together what had happened, how his perfect new life had disintegrated in less than 72 hours. He thought about calling Emma, begging her to take him back, but pride stopped him. Besides, what would he say? That he'd made a mistake? That he wanted back into the prison of medical bills and dying children? Even now, even in this disaster, his mind recoiled from that fate. The truth came the next morning, delivered not in person, but through every news channel, every newspaper, every trending topic on social media. Daniel sat in his dingy motel room, coffee from the lobby machine growing cold in his hand, and watched his entire world collapse in real time. The headline on CNBC read, "Sterling Global Construction awarded historic $72 billion infrastructure contract." The news anchor was explaining the details, showing footage of ribbon-cutting ceremonies and architectural renderings of magnificent new bridges and highways. But it wasn't the infrastructure deal that made Daniel's blood run cold. It was the photograph they kept showing of the woman who'd made it happen. Emma, his Emma, wearing a designer suit that probably cost more than his car, standing next to the Secretary of Transportation and 3 senators, shaking hands with the President of the United States. Emma, who he'd left standing in a hospital room in discount store clothes. Emma, who the anchor was calling the visionary CEO of Sterling Global Construction and one of the most powerful women in American infrastructure. Emma Sterling Chen, who inherited the company from her father 8 years ago and has since grown it from a $3 billion regional firm to a $40 billion international powerhouse, has just secured the largest single infrastructure contract in U.S. history. The anchor continued. The project will rebuild critical infrastructure across 15 states and is expected to create 200,000 jobs over the next decade. Ms. Sterling Chen, known for her reclusiveness and refusal to engage in the typical social circuit of the ultra-wealthy, has pioneered revolutionary construction techniques and sustainable building practices that have made her company the obvious choice for this historic undertaking. Daniel's hands were shaking so badly he dropped his coffee cup. It shattered on the cheap carpet, spreading a dark stain, but he couldn't look away from the television. They were showing more photos now. Emma at groundbreaking ceremonies he'd never heard about. Emma meeting with foreign dignitaries. Emma's signature on documents worth billions. The same signature he'd watched her put on divorce papers 4 days ago, while he'd felt nothing but relief and contempt. Sterling Chen is also known for her philanthropic work, the anchor went on, particularly her foundation supporting children's cancer research. In a statement released this morning, she announced that 10% of the profits from this infrastructure deal, an estimated $7 billion, will be donated to establish free treatment centers for childhood leukemia across the country. The announcement is particularly poignant, as sources close to Sterling Chen confirm that her own 7-year-old daughter is currently battling the disease. The screen showed a photo of Emma and Lily, taken before the cancer, before Daniel's betrayal. Lily was laughing, her long black hair shining in the sun, and Emma was looking at her daughter with an expression of such pure love that Daniel felt something crack open in his chest. When had Emma last looked at him that way? Had she ever? Or had he been too blind to see it when she did? His phone started ringing. Reporters, he realized, dozens of them, somehow having gotten his number. He ignored them all and opened his laptop with trembling fingers, searching for more information, trying to understand how this was possible. How had Emma hidden this? How had he never known? The answers came in pieces, each one a knife to his understanding of reality. Sterling Global Construction wasn't some obscure company. It was one of the largest private construction firms in the world, with projects on 4 continents. Emma wasn't a budget analyst. She was the CEO, and her budget analysis work had been maintaining her cover at her own company, working in the accounting department under an assumed name so she could understand every aspect of her business from the ground up. The late nights at the office had been board meetings and contract negotiations. The boring conferences had been summits with world leaders. Every financial struggle Daniel had resented, every penny-pinching measure that had driven him into Vanessa's arms, had been a deliberate test. Emma had wanted to see who he was when money was tight, when life was hard, when their daughter was dying. And he'd failed so spectacularly that she'd had it documented, photographed, recorded for posterity. Because that was the other thing Daniel discovered as he fell deeper into the rabbit hole of internet searches. Vanessa hadn't been his mistress. She'd been Emma's goddaughter, her deputy director, her loyal operative in an elaborate loyalty test. Every romantic dinner, every intimate moment, every promise of a better future had been theater. Vanessa had been feeding information back to Emma the entire time, documenting Daniel's betrayal, his resentment, his cruelty to his sick daughter. There were messages now on social media, hundreds of them, people who'd figured out who he was and were calling him every name imaginable. Someone had leaked the story, probably deliberately, probably by Emma or someone acting on her behalf, about how he'd abandoned his dying daughter to run off with his mistress. And about how he'd left his wife because he thought she was poor, never knowing she was a billionaire. About how he'd complained about medical bills while his wife sat on a fortune large enough to buy a small country. Daniel Chen, the ultimate gold digger who somehow managed to dig in the wrong place, one viral tweet read, accompanied by a photo of him leaving the hospital, Vanessa on his arm. He didn't remember anyone taking that photo, but someone had, and now it was everywhere. His smiling face next to his mistress while his daughter fought for her life. His phone buzzed with a new email, this one from a lawyer he'd never heard of. With shaking hands, he opened it. Mr. Chen, I represent Sterling Global Construction and Ms. Emma Sterling Chen. Please be advised that the following actions have been taken pursuant to your divorce agreement and subsequent conduct. 1. All assets transferred to you during your marriage have been reclaimed as per the prenuptial agreement you signed 8 years ago. You may not have read the prenup carefully, but it clearly stated that any assets gained during the marriage would revert to Ms. Sterling Chen in the event of divorce initiated by you or caused by your infidelity. 2. A restraining order has been filed preventing you from contacting Ms. Sterling Chen or her daughter. Violation will result in immediate arrest. 3. Sterling Global Construction has issued a company-wide directive to all business partners, requiring them to choose between maintaining their relationship with SGC or employing you in any capacity. Given that SGC accounts for significant revenue for most major corporations in the United States, we anticipate this will make future employment challenging for you. 4. Ms. Sterling Chen wants you to know that your daughter is being transferred to Johns Hopkins for an experimental treatment that has a 97% success rate. The treatment is fully funded, and Lily is expected to make a complete recovery. You will not be informed of further updates, as Lily has requested no contact with you. 5. Ms. Chen, your former mistress, wishes to convey that her participation in your relationship was undertaken at Ms. Sterling Chen's request as part of a character assessment. She found the assignment distasteful, but remained committed out of loyalty to her godmother. She has asked me to tell you that you failed in ways she didn't think possible. Daniel read the email 3 times, each word landing like a physical blow. The prenup. He vaguely remembered signing something before the wedding, but Emma had assured him it was just a formality, that her father insisted on it, that it didn't really mean anything. He'd been too excited about the wedding to read it carefully, too in love with the beautiful woman who was somehow agreeing to marry him. Now he understood. Emma had been protecting herself even then, had perhaps even known on some level that this day might come. The restraining order meant he couldn't even apologize to Lily, couldn't try to explain himself to the daughter who'd asked him to stay and whom he'd abandoned anyway. The business directive meant he'd never work in his industry again. Sterling Global's reach was too vast, their influence too complete. No company could afford to lose them, and no company would hire the man they'd blacklisted. But it was the part about Lily that broke him completely. She was going to survive. His daughter, the little girl whose illness had been his excuse for running away, was going to live, and she'd requested no contact with him. At 7 years old, dying of leukemia, abandoned by her father, she'd made the decision that she didn't want him in her life anymore. Even if he recovered from this disaster, even if he somehow rebuilt his reputation and his career, he would never recover from that. Daniel spent the next week in a haze, watching his life get dissected on social media and news programs. Think pieces were written about toxic masculinity and gold diggers and the karmic justice of his downfall. His face became a meme, a cautionary tale, a punchline. Daniel Chendit became slang for catastrophically misjudging a situation. Late-night comedians made jokes at his expense. His parents called, horrified and ashamed, demanding to know how he could have done this. His father, a man who'd worked 3 jobs to put Daniel through college, could barely speak through his disappointment. Emma never made a public statement about him. She didn't have to. Her silence was more damning than any words could have been. She simply continued with her life, posting occasional updates about Lily's improving health, about the progress on the infrastructure project, about the new cancer treatment centers being built in her daughter's name. She looked radiant in the photos, not like a woman who'd been betrayed and abandoned, but like a woman who'd successfully cut a malignant growth out of her life. 3 months later, Daniel was working as a night security guard at a warehouse, living in a studio apartment he could barely afford, when he saw the final nail in his coffin. Emma had gotten remarried, not to some billionaire or titan of industry, but to Marcus Webb, the charge nurse who'd cared for Lily during her treatment. The photos from their small private ceremony showed Emma in a simple white dress, Lily healthy and beaming beside her, her hair growing back in soft black waves. Marcus was looking at Emma the way Daniel had once pretended to, but with a depth of genuine devotion that was evident even through a photograph. The caption on Emma's rare social media post read, "Married the love of my life today, surrounded by the people who prove that family isn't about blood, it's about who stays when staying is hard. Marcus held my hand through the darkest time of my life and asked nothing in return but the chance to keep holding it. Lily has a father who chose us not for what we have, but for who we are. That's the only wealth that matters." Daniel stared at the post for hours, understanding finally what he'd lost. Not the billions, though that staggered him every time he thought about it, but the love of a woman who would have moved mountains for him, who had moved mountains for him and never asked for recognition. He'd been married to someone extraordinary and treated her like she was ordinary. He'd had a daughter who adored him, and he'd taught her that love was conditional, that when things got hard, the people who claimed to love you would leave. The final message came not from Emma, but from Vanessa, a year after everything had fallen apart. It was a single text, unannounced and unexpected. "Emma wanted me to tell you something. She said that every single day of your marriage, she woke up hoping you'd prove her wrong, hoping you were the man you pretended to be. She said she would have given you everything, not the money, but the real everything, if you just stayed. If you just held Lily's hand and said, 'We'll get through this together.' She tested you because her father tested her mother and discovered gold. She tested you and discovered fool's gold. She wanted you to know that she doesn't hate you, she pities you. And so do I." Daniel never responded. What could he say? That he was sorry? Sorry didn't bring back Lily's childhood or Emma's trust. Sorry didn't erase the photos of him leaving the hospital with his mistress while his daughter lay dying. Sorry didn't undo the choice he'd made to value perceived wealth over actual love, to chase fool's gold while standing on a real fortune. He'd asked Emma once, in the early days of their marriage, what she valued most in life. She'd said, "Loyalty. Everything else can be bought or built. But loyalty, that's the only currency that matters in the end." He dismissed it as naive, the philosophy of someone who'd never had enough money to understand its power. Now working his minimum wage job and living in his tiny apartment, blacklisted from the industry he'd once thrived in. Daniel finally understood. Emma hadn't tested him with poverty, she'd tested him with loyalty, and he'd sold it for the promise of a lifestyle upgrade that had never existed. The infrastructure project Emma had led was completed 5 years later, transforming American cities and creating the jobs she'd promised. The cancer treatment centers bearing Lily's name saved thousands of children's lives. Emma's fortune grew to over $100 billion, making her one of the wealthiest women in the world, and she used it to fund research and innovation and opportunities for people who needed them. And Daniel Chen, the man who'd walked away from a fortune because he thought his wife was poor, became a footnote in her story. A cautionary tale about the difference between price and value, about the catastrophic cost of judging worth by wealth, and about the ultimate truth that Emma had known all along. The only treasure that matters is the one that stays when everything else is gone. He'd thrown that away for a fantasy, and he would spend the rest of his life understanding exactly what that meant.